Alexander Blackwood had built an empire from nothing more than ambition, persistence, and almost punishing drive that left little room for weakness. At just 39 years old, he was a commanding figure behind Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, a corporation worth billions and known across continents for breakthroughs in medicine. His name alone could stir financial markets, and his signature determined the direction of entire industries. Yet, on that quiet afternoon in rural Montana, all that power, wealth, and recognition seemed to dissolve into insignificance as his chest tightened with a crushing pressure he could not ignore. The pain came without warning, sharp, radiating down his left arm, leaving him breathless in the back seat of his armored SUV. His security detail, trained to anticipate emergencies of every kind, reacted instantly. The convoy sped down a stretch of two-lane highway that cut through vast fields of golden grass, the jagged silhouettes of mountains on the horizon. The closest major hospital was hundreds of miles away, but there was no time. When the pain forced Alexander to clutch his chest and collapse against the leather seat, his lead guard barked an order, and within minutes the convoy swerved into a gravel lot, a modest building with a hand-painted sign, Pine Valley Community Clinic. It was a place Alexander would never have entered under normal circumstances, a small-town clinic that served farmers, ranchers, and families who could not afford the luxuries of private hospitals or world-renowned specialists. Yet in that moment, this humble facility became his only hope. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine-scented cleaner. The plastic chairs were worn, the magazines on the side table outdated. As Alexander stumbled through the entrance, supported on either side by a security detail, the fluorescent lights above flickered. His guards immediately pulled out phones, already calling for a helicopter to transport him to a larger medical center. Their voices filled the air with urgency, commands, and logistical details. But amid all the noise, one voice rose above the rest, calm, clear, and professional. "Sir, can you tell me your name and describe what you're feeling?" Alexander turned his head, dazed, and met the steady gaze of a woman kneeling beside him. She couldn't have been more than her early 30s. Light brown hair was pulled into a practical ponytail, a few strands falling loose against her cheeks. Her eyes, a striking green, carried none of the panic he saw reflected in his security team. Instead, they held only focus and reassurance. "My name," he swallowed hard, the words coming out softer than he intended. "My name is Alex." He instinctively shortened it, a habit he rarely indulged outside moments of vulnerability. The pain into my chest, radiating down my arm. The nurse, Sarah Martinez, her name stitched neatly into the fabric of her badge, immediately pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, checking his pulse. Her tone remained even, unshaken. "Alex, I'm Sarah. We're going to take good care of you. Let's get you into an exam room so Dr. Henderson can assess you properly." It wasn't her words alone that anchored him, but the way she delivered them, with the kind of quiet authority that could steady even the most frightened patient. She signaled to the staff with calm efficiency, and soon Alexander was guided into a small room where machines hummed softly and sterile curtains surrounded him. For the first time in years, he was not being treated like a powerful CEO or a headline-worthy figure. Neither Sarah nor Dr. Henderson, the clinic's gray-haired physician, seemed to recognize him at all. They didn't pause to question his status, didn't soften their voices in deference to his wealth. Instead, they treated him as what he was in that moment. A man in distress, a patient who needed care. Hours passed in a blur of tests and monitors. To his immense relief and faint embarrassment, the results revealed that he hadn't suffered a heart attack, but rather a severe panic attack. Years of stress, sleepless nights, and relentless travel had finally exacted a toll his body could no longer mask. "You need rest," Dr. Henderson said firmly after reviewing the charts. "Your body is warning you, Mr. Blackwood, before something much more serious happens." Alexander nodded, though the words echoed like a reprimand. He had always pushed himself past limits, convinced that rest was a luxury he could not afford. Now, lying in a clinic bed with wires attached to his chest, he realized just how fragile the illusion of control could be. While his security team continued arranging for his private physician to consult remotely and a helicopter to arrive from Denver, Sarah remained at his side. She monitored his vitals with quiet attentiveness, bringing him water, adjusting his pillows, and offering the kind of small comforts that felt oddly profound after years of being surrounded by people who cared only about his decisions, not his well-being. "You mentioned you were traveling," Sarah said gently as she recorded his blood pressure. "Business meetings in Montana?" "Yes," Alexander replied, choosing honesty in part, but holding back the full truth. "Too much travel, not enough time for myself." Sarah nodded knowingly. "It happens more often than people realize. Stress sneaks up on you, and your body has no choice but to remind you it can't be ignored." She hesitated, then added, "Do you have family who can help you manage some of that pressure?" For reasons he couldn't fully explain, the question pierced deeper than expected. His parents had died in a tragic car accident years earlier. His ex-wife, once drawn to his ambition, had walked away when it became clear that wealth mattered more to her than love. He had no siblings, no one to lean on. "Not really," he admitted quietly. "I've gotten used to handling things alone." Sarah gave him a look that was neither pitying nor judgmental, simply understanding. Sometimes the hardest thing is letting someone else carry a little of the weight. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left the room. When the helicopter finally touched down outside the clinic hours later, its blades chopping the air with deafening urgency, Alexander felt something strange. He wasn't eager to leave. For the first time in years, he had been seen not as Alexander Blackwood, billionaire CEO, but simply as Alex, a man who needed help, and the woman who had given it had done so with a kind of kindness he couldn't put a price on. As Sarah helped him prepare for transport, he managed a faint smile. "Thank you for everything. You've been remarkably kind." Sarah smiled in return, her expression warm and unassuming. "Just take care of yourself, Alex. Your health matters more than any meeting you think you're missing." 3 weeks later, Sarah was surprised when a delivery arrived at the clinic. A massive arrangement of fresh flowers, so vibrant they brightened the modest reception area. Tucked among the blooms was a handwritten card. "Thank you for reminding me I'm human. Alex." At the bottom was a phone number. Sarah placed the flowers in a vase, smiled at the gesture, and then set them aside, assuming she would never hear from him again. But fate had other plans. A month later, when the clinic's front door swung open one quiet afternoon, Sarah glanced up from her paperwork and froze. Standing there, dressed in casual clothes instead of the expensive suit she remembered, was Alex. "Alex," she said, surprised but genuinely pleased. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," he replied, though there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "Thanks to your advice about rest and balance." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might have dinner with me. Nothing fancy, just a proper thank you." Sarah studied him, searching for any trace of insincerity. All she found was a man who looked almost boyishly hopeful. After a pause, she nodded. "I finish at 6. If you don't mind simple food, there's a diner in town." That evening at Murphy's Diner, over chipped coffee mugs and home-style cooking, Alexander found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years. Sarah asked him about his life, his work, his travels. He spoke carefully, skirting around the full truth of his fortune, letting her assume he was a mid-level pharmaceutical worker rather than the man who controlled the industry. And Sarah, refreshingly, seemed uninterested in prestige. She spoke of her childhood in Pine Valley, her decision to return after nursing school, her belief that medicine should always be about people rather than profit. For the first time in years, Alexander felt seen. Over the following weeks, dinners at Murphy's Diner became something of a quiet tradition. Alexander, still Alex in Sarah's eyes, discovered that life in Pine Valley moved at a pace entirely unlike the relentless schedules of boardrooms and international flights. There were no late-night calls from shareholders, no endless calendar of conferences. Instead, there were simple meals, conversations that lasted long after dessert, and walks beneath wide Montana skies where the stars glittered without the interference of city lights. To maintain his cover, Alexander rented a modest apartment above the general store, claiming it was easier than booking hotels whenever he had regional work in Montana. Sarah didn't question it. She was too busy adjusting to the strange but comforting rhythm of having Alex in her life. He showed up with coffee for her on long shifts, helped patch fences at the clinic when storms damaged them, and even volunteered at the town's annual fair. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander found himself blending into a community that valued him not for what he owned but for how he showed up. The locals, quick to welcome newcomers, appreciated his willingness to roll up his sleeves. He was invited to barbecues, Sunday picnics, and small-town gatherings where his name carried no weight beyond the introduction Sarah offered. "This is Alex, a friend of mine." And Sarah. Sarah became the anchor he hadn't realized he'd been searching for. She challenged him in ways no board member or corporate rival ever had. When he admitted that stress still chased him, she encouraged him to try breathing exercises and even teased him into attending a local yoga class. When he confessed how much he admired her dedication to the clinic, she simply shrugged, saying, "Everyone deserves care, Alex, not just the people who can afford it." Her words often lingered in his mind, stirring thoughts that went beyond their conversations. For months, Alexander managed to live this double life, CEO in the shadows, Alex in the light of Sarah's company. But secrets have a way of pressing against walls, and eventually, the weight of his deception grew too heavy. He didn't want her to find out by accident, nor could he bear the thought of betraying her trust. It happened on a crisp autumn evening, 6 months after that first dinner. The leaves in Pine Valley had turned shades of amber and crimson, and the town park glowed beneath strings of lanterns hung for the harvest festival. Children darted around with caramel apples in hand, laughter mingling with the sound of a local band playing on the gazebo. Alexander and Sarah strolled along the path, their hands brushing occasionally before settling together with an ease that had become second nature. He had rehearsed his confession a dozen times, but the words still felt heavy on his tongue. Finally, beneath the soft glow of the lanterns, he stopped walking. "Sarah," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." She turned to him, concern flickering across her features. "What is it? Are you all right?" He drew in a breath. "My name isn't just Alex. It's Alexander Blackwood." The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Sarah blinked. The name registered almost instantly. How could it not? She'd seen his face on magazine covers, even if she hadn't connected the dots before. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing at first. "I own Blackwood Pharmaceuticals," he continued, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "The chest pains you treated that night, they were from the stress of running a company worth billions. I didn't tell you because," he hesitated, the vulnerability raw, "because for the first time in years, someone saw me as a person, not a bank account. And I couldn't bear to lose that." Silence stretched between them. Music in the gazebo floated through the air, distant and oddly cheerful against the tension. Sarah finally exhaled, shaking her head slightly as though to clear her thoughts. "You're telling me you're the Alexander Blackwood?" He nodded once, bracing for disappointment, anger, or the inevitable shift in how she looked at him. He had seen it happen countless times. Eyes that once sparkled with warmth suddenly clouded with calculation, people rearranging their words and posture the moment his wealth was revealed. But Sarah surprised him. Her brows drew together, not in awe but in quiet frustration. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because," Alexander admitted, his voice almost pleading, "I didn't want this, what we have, to be poisoned by everything that usually follows my name. With you, I could be Alex. I could laugh, relax, even breathe without wondering if I was being valued for who I am or what I own." Sarah was silent again, processing. Finally, she met his eyes with the same steadiness she'd shown that first day in the clinic. "It explains a lot, like how you can afford to visit so often, or why you seemed so surprised that I treated you like a normal patient." He swallowed. "Does it change how you feel about me?" She considered the question carefully. Then she shook her head. "No, because what I fell in love with wasn't your company or your fortune. It was your kindness, your intelligence, the way you light up when you talk about this community. Money doesn't change those things. It doesn't change who you are when you're here, Alex." Relief flooded him, so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. For the first time since his empire had taken root, someone had looked past the wealth and power and chosen him for the man he was. They married a year later in a ceremony that reflected both their worlds. Rather than a lavish event in some gilded ballroom, they exchanged vows in the very place where their story had begun, Pine Valley Community Clinic. The modest building, usually filled with the quiet hum of medical work, had been transformed with wildflowers gathered from surrounding fields and ribbons tied by the townspeople. Sarah wore her grandmother's simple lace gown, while Alexander, in a tailored but understated suit, stood before her with a vow not just to love her, but to honor the values she had taught him. "I promise," he said in his vows, his voice steady with emotion, "to use everything I have not just for profit, but for people, for communities like this one, for the places that are too often forgotten." True to his word, Alexander and Sarah established a foundation that funded medical scholarships for students from rural backgrounds. They expanded clinic services across Montana, ensuring towns like Pine Valley had access to quality health care. Alexander poured resources into telemedicine, rural hospitals, and programs that offered hope where before there had been scarcity. Yet for all the headlines those efforts earned, what mattered most to Alexander was the life he built with Sarah. Their evenings were spent walking to the town park, cooking simple meals, or hosting neighbors who never once treated him like a billionaire. He had finally found a family, not through blood or contracts, but through love and shared purpose. Years later, when medical students asked Sarah about finding meaning in their work, she often returned to the lessons she had learned with Alexander. "Sometimes," she would say, her green eyes filled with warmth, "the most important patients aren't the ones with the most urgent symptoms. They're the ones who remind us that healing goes both ways. The connections we make, the humanity we see in one another, are worth more than any paycheck or accolade. That's what makes this work matter." And if her students ever pressed her about the mysterious man whose flowers had once filled the clinic, Sarah would smile knowingly and say only this: "He taught me that the greatest kind of wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love and kindness we choose to share."